Yo, what's good, E7 fam? Pat here, back with another how to play guide, and in this one we'll be talking about the girl who's had more merchandise made for her than probably any other anime character in the last 6 years, and that probably includes Goku too. I'm of course talking about Rem from ReZero. In this guide, I'll be going over almost everything you could want to know about her, including things like her stats, her skills, some possible endgame equipment builds for you to try out, some voice actor trivia, as well as some PvP matchup knowledge if that's your thing. So if you find this video helpful, please consider leaving me a like, and if you're not already, please consider subscribing. Helps me out a ton here at this channel. And with that intro out of the way, let's talk about Rem's stats. Rem is an ice warrior of the Scorpio zodiac symbol. Her stat line is unique to her. Taking a look at her stat line, she has 1,208 attack, 6,488 health, 102 speed, 616 defense, 15% critical hit chance, 150% critical hit damage, 5% dual attack chance, and no effectiveness or effect resistance. Overall, this stat line is really good for Rem and what she's trying to do. It has higher than average attack for a damage dealer, the third highest health total amongst warriors. She's in the third bracket there, so it's a pretty good health total to have. She has really solid defense as well. The only thing that she's really lacking with this stat line is speed. Her speed is the lowest amongst all warriors, but you don't really care at all about that because this character doesn't want to be fast no matter how you build her, and it should become apparent when we talk about her skills in the very next section. In all versions of Epic 7 as well as ReZero itself, Rem is voiced by Inori Minase, who is an accomplished singer as well as a voiceover artist that you can hear in a number of various different anime and games, including things like Hestia in the Danmachi franchise, Itsuki from the Quintessential Quintuplets, and Reine's El Malloy from the Fate franchise. Rem's S1 is Leave It to Me. It has a 0.95x multiplier and has a 35 to 50% chance to defense break the target for 2 turns. A slightly below average multiplier for an S1 as well as a fairly standard defense breaking multiplier. Although it is for 2 turns as opposed to 1 when compared to some other S1s in the game. Overall, this would be a fairly standard S1 if not for the final part of the skill itself. When the caster is granted demon mode, grants the caster an extra attack with the same skill. So if you have demon mode, this S1 will fire twice, making it actually ridiculous. So what's demon mode, you ask? That's probably the next logical question. It is a component of her S2 passive, which is her signature skill, a Maid's Pride. As soon as someone dies, Rem cleanses all debuffs from herself and enters demon mode. Demon mode can only be activated once every 5 turns. Demon mode makes Rem unable to be affected by all debuffs as long as it originated from a hero. Additionally, demon mode makes Rem ignore effect resistance while attacking, meaning that she needs 0 effectiveness to take full advantage of all of the debuffs that are in her kit. Finally, demon mode cannot be dispelled whatsoever and lasts for 2 turns. If that's not an insane buff, I don't really know what is. But it doesn't stop there. When an ally is attacked on Rem's team, there is a 15 to 20% chance to activate Iron Strike as long as the person being attacked was not Rem. In the event that Rem activates a counter set proc as well as Iron Strike at the same time, say for example due to an AoE attack, Iron Strike will supersede that. Iron Strike is an AoE attack with a 0.5x multiplier before decreasing all enemy buff durations by 1 turn and inflicting them with unhealable also for 1 turn. So yeah, this is kind of a doozy of an S2. A Maid's Pride is basically Rem as a character. She's just going to sit there patiently waiting for someone, literally anyone, to die so that she can go berserk and start raining down counters on the enemy team. Iron Strike is an incredibly good S2 counter despite the fact that it has a slightly worse than average multiplier. Being able to just rain down AoE counters whenever your opponent attacks someone other than Rem is very frightening because they're going to be losing their buffs, taking a fair amount of damage, and they're not going to be able to recover from it. So yeah, Overall, from just the first two skills alone, Rem is a fairly complete character when you think about it. She has a clearly defined game plan and playstyle from just these two things, and she's incredibly threatening with just that S1 as long as she's in demon mode. Again, a pretty much complete character. The only thing she's really missing is a way to give herself more damage. Oh wait, that's her S3. So yeah, the S3 is I Will Punish You. You acquire 3 souls upon use, and it has a 4 to 5 turn cooldown depending on Molagora. Before this move even goes off, she gets an attack buff for 3 turns before she launches into an AoE attack with a 1x multiplier. Additionally, this skill has a 100% chance to blind all enemies for 2 turns, as well as increases Rem's combat readiness by 50%. A fairly standard AoE S3, if not for the fact that this move has a damage amplification before it actually goes off. It also provides some level of protection to Rem's team because that blind is basically guaranteed if she is in demon mode. Perhaps the worst part about the S3 is the 50% combat readiness boost. Normally, this would be amazing for any other character, but given that Rem only has 2 turns in demon mode to get the job done before she fizzles out, basically taking turns faster is not always the correct option. It's important to note that when you are playing Rem, that if you do not need the attack buff, if you already have it from another character, or you don't immediately need the blind to save someone on your team, it might be more useful to you to hold off on using the skill, so that way you can reap the benefits of her insanely powerful counter attacks, extra attacks, and dual attacks as long as she is berserk. Rem's Soulbird increases the effect chance of the defense break on her S1 to 100%. Why yes, I would love to spend 10 souls in order to guarantee a defense break on a target if it's going to be followed up with another S1 that's going to hit reasonably hard. Yeah, basically if you're in demon mode with Rem, this is basically lethal or very close to lethal against a lot of characters unless for some reason they have like Crimson Seed on Apocalypse Robbie and can get out of it. It's just a lot of damage. It's very backbreaking as a soul burn, again, as long as you're in demon mode. So it's definitely worth using. When it comes to Molagora priorities, I think you want to max the S2 A Maid's Pride first because it gives you the highest chance of counterattacking. The primary reasons that you're playing Rem are for the AoE counter as well as the very strong S1 as long as you are in demon mode. So I think you want to max out the consistency on the character first with the S2 A Maid's Pride, followed immediately after by the S1 Leave It To Me. You want that increased defense break chance as well as hitting as hard as possible. Again, slightly below average S1 for a character, but when you get 2 of them back to back and the second one is going to almost always be following up off of a defense break, it hits really, really hard and does a lot of damage. Finally, I think you're going to want to take the S3 at least to the -1 turn cooldown, just so that way it comes up as frequently as possible. But this is a damage dealer at the end of the day, and I do think you want her at +15. The reason this is the lowest priority is, again, for the same things that we talked about with the S3 section. The 50% combat readiness might not be it sometimes, so if you're really just strapped for Molagoras, I think this is the one that you can kind of skimp on. So Best Girl 2016 proved in episode 18 of ReZero why she is one of the most beloved anime waifu in recent memory, and why Natsuki Subaru is one of the dumbest anime protagonists of all time. She's one of the bestest of best girls, an absolutely perfect angel, and my favorite ReZero character. At the end of the day though, this video that I'm making isn't about Rem from ReZero, it's about Rem in Epic 7, and trust me when I say she's probably my least favorite character to play against, period. My guildmates probably know this all too well, as I commonly set guild war messages when I'm having a bad day to simply just f*** Rem. And if you've ever played with or against this unit since the first time the collab is dropped, you probably know exactly what I mean when I say that, even though it's censored, and you've probably exclaimed the very same thing at least once or twice while you've been playing against her. Rem's playstyle can be summarized as a sleeping beast. She's either going to never trigger and you're never going to get any of her counter. She's going to get super focused and then just die. Or she's going to be wide awake and rain down iron and hellfire against everyone that stands in her way. The problem here is that no one knows which version of Rem is going to show up that game, not even the person who selected Rem. Some games she's just going to counter or, defense break everything, and not even a perfectly well-crafted team that is supposed to fight against her pans out. Other times she's just kind of sitting there, her head's in the clouds, and both players are just feeling bad for whichever person actually selected the Rem. The true random nature of how this character performs is why people used to refer to her and still do refer to her and other similar units as the casino. They have no idea what they are going to get when they pick her. Rem can giveth, and Rem can taketh away everything if she chooses at any given time. And it's for that reason that you commonly see her played against cleave teams. You can't outspeed the enemy? Cool. Just get down on your knees and pray to the goddess Rem in hopes that she smiles down upon you mercifully and you are one of her chosen few disciples and she saves you. Yeah, that's really how this character feels and how she functions. Rem really only has one PvP build, and that's just the tankiest, slowest counter-based character to maximize demon mode that you can think of. She does have a second use, however, though, and that is as a Wyvern 13 one-shot character that can replace Sigret, and even though I didn't cover it in my all-in-one guide, I will include that build here in the video. But first, we have to at least talk about that slow counter PvP build because I'm sure that's what most of you are all here for. So for this counter set Rem build, I'm going to be doing things slightly differently than I normally do in these how to play videos. I'm going to be showing you kind of the midpoint of where all of the counter set builds kind of are for Rem. And it will be up to you to decide if the value is too low and you need to raise it, or it's too high and you need to lower it. What you get out of the counter set Rem depends on what you're trying to use her for. Is it essentially just somebody who hits really hard to punish a specific type of hero, like say Bellion? Or is it just as an answer to Cleave, or is it for your Guild War defense? So again, these are all questions you're going to have to ask yourself. They all stem off of the same basic idea, which is that we're going to be playing Rem on a counter set with a crit offset. If you have a bunch of imprints on Rem, you can obviously use things like immunity, HP, or defense set if you so choose. Crit is the hardest thing I think for a lot of people to get on the stats, so that's why I've recommended crit hit chance set. But again, if you're like somebody who just has a bunch of copies, you're really lucky, or you're just a whale, then yeah, you can choose something else. Immunity used to be the standard, but I think immunity set right now is a lot weaker than it has been in the past, so I don't feel like it's as mandatory as it used to be. I'm currently trying out a health set, even though I have kind of like a jank body piece. The gear score is actually pretty good on it, so it kind of makes it worth it. Looking at the desired stats, I have 3,300 attack. I think this is kind of like the midpoint between the very tanky Rems and the really high damage Rems that are looking to have really big, impactful counters that can kill things outright. So I think for a lot of people, for a balance type, somewhere around 32 to 3,300 attack is absolutely fine. If you want to go for damage, you can go as high as 3,700. If you're just looking for a very tanky Rem, somewhere around like 2,900 to 3K is probably a good spot that you can settle in on. For the defense, I have 1,350 here. This is kind of like a nice midpoint for bruisers. It's a lot harder to get higher defense than this unless you have a Rem with like triple S imprint, or you just have really, really good gear on her. So I think this is a good spot. If you're looking for a tankier Rem, though, definitely go for 1,500 or higher defense. Don't really ever go too much lower than this, even if you're trying to do a damage Rem. She'll just die like instantly with how slow she actually is. For health, I have 19k. I think this is a good spot for a balanced Rem. For a more damage-oriented Rem, it's somewhere around the high 17s to maybe even like the mid 18k range. If you're looking for a very tanky Rem, you're going to want to look for over 21k HP if you can get it. Speed, we have 102 speed because we want to maximize the amount of time that we are staying inside of demon mode once it triggers. We just want her to be as slow as possible. For the critical hit chance, we want 100% because she is a damage dealer and we want to make sure she does her job. For critical hit damage, we have 250%. If you're going for a more damage-oriented rem, you can go as high as 280, but somewhere in the 260s is probably fine if you're looking for a little bit more damage, like 265, 268, somewhere in that range. Taking a look at the right side, we are in a crit damage necklace for obviously the extra amount of damage. For the ring, I have HP percentage here, but you can use attack percentage, and the boots are exactly the same. It's going to be the opposite there. So you're either going to be on either HP ring and attack boots, or on obviously attack ring with HP boots. And depending on how the stats roll, you might even go double HP or double attack. I leave that to you. Some combination of HP and attack on the ring and HP and attack on the boots. For the artifact, we are on Sigurd Scythe. This is by far the best option on the character, because one of the ways to play around Rem is to just keep attacking her directly, and that basically bypasses any chance of Iron Strike triggering, and therefore your Rem is going to get really low, but you still have the counter set chance proc from the actual set. And once you get under 50%, Sigurd Scythe basically gives you a huge damage amp and lifesteal. It just makes her incredibly difficult to kill if they are trying to focus her for the most part. And if you get low on health, you can fire off the S3 and basically jump almost back up to full health immediately. So it really just is the best option, I feel like, in almost every scenario. Although there are a couple that are worth noting. Azure Comet is solid. It does come on her banner. It is a good choice if you just don't have Sigurd Scythe, or yours is occupied on another bruiser for the most part. But I really think Sigurd Scythe is best on Rem, so you can use Azure Comet. And then I have Proof of Valor as well, and this is more for people who are trying to play Rem on like their Guild War defense. They, it's kind of like a surprise, like a gotcha factor, like, oh, they're going to come in with their, green-based assassin to try and one-shot your Rem. Well, surprise, it's actually on Proof of Valor. You failed, your team's probably a glass cannon character. And now Rem can kind of just pick up the pieces and just basically take you out of the fight. So that is something for you to try as well if you don't want to go for Sigurd Scythe. Looking at the per piece average, I have 16% HP, 14% defense, 12% critical hit chance, which is kind of a lot when you consider the bulk stats. Again, you really want imprints on this character. And then for the leftover pieces, it's any amount of crit damage or attack that we can pick up to make up the pieces. You're going to need to average around 11% or more attack, and obviously 6% or more crit damage per piece. As previously mentioned before we talked about the counter set build, here is going to be the Wyvern 13 one-shot build. I didn't include it in my Wyvern 13 one-shot all-in-one video because honestly, it is about as good as Sigret. It's like 3 to 5 seconds faster, and it requires you to sacrifice a limited unit that is very powerful in PvP. But if for some reason you wanted to use Rem instead of Sigret, you could use it with the stats that I am going to show you in just a second. Again, I do things here on how to play largely for completeness sake. There might come a time when, say, Sigret gets a huge buff that makes her like amazing in PvP, and for some reason we just don't want to use her on Wyvern anymore. We can use Rem instead with a build like this one. So we are going to be on a rage set with a critical hit chance offset. If for some reason you have a high enough critical hit chance, you can use penetration set. If you're going to use penetration set, the desired stats change ever so slightly. Taking a look at the desired stats, we have 4,600 or better attack if we can get it. If you're on pen set, I believe the number is around somewhere, say around 4,300, so it's a little bit less. You have to experiment and kind of test it for yourself, so to see. The defense is 926. That is literally Rem's base defense with an I-90 body. Health is a very similar story. 9,505 is her health with an I-90 helmet, as well as a plus 30 Daydream Joker. Speed is at base. Critical hit chance is 85%, because if you remember from the Wyvern video, you get plus 15% if you're a blue unit when attacking Wyvern, so no reason to go over 85 there. Crit damage is going to be 310% or better if you can get it. Taking a look at the right side, critical hit damage necklace. Ring is going to be attack percentage because we're only carrying about the actual attack, and Boots is attack percentage. Artifact is Daydream Joker to maximize damage, much in the same way that Sigret does. You play this Rem very similar to how you play Sigret from the all-in-one Wyvern 13 guide. She simply just replaces Sigret. You still play Sinful Angelica, Corinne, and Seaside Bologna, or your Clarissa in the slot of Seaside Bologna. There are a couple of other variations that you can try where you can replace Corinne with a character like a damage-based Adventurer Roz or the ML 3-star Camilla if you so choose. Again, overall, it is largely still that same team. Looking at the per piece average, I have 30% attack per average piece. That is a bit deceptive. That assumes that you are going to get flat attack on your ring and your boots, since you cannot have attack percentage as a substat. So for every piece, it's going to end up being something like attack percentage, flat attack, crit damage, and crit chance on it. And again, I stress this in a lot of my videos, high flat attack is really needed on those rings and those boots where you otherwise could not get the attack percentage. That's how you get the math to work. That's how you get the pieces to work. That's how you get the character to work. We also need 10% critical hit chance and 18% critical hit damage per piece. Again, not the flashiest build, not too much of an explanation as to why it's here. Again, completeness sake, maybe in the future we just for some reason don't need to use Sigret anymore in Wyvern. We already talked about it earlier in the video, but Rem is someone who really excels against cleave teams, which means you want to be pairing her with those same kind of cleave specialists, whether that is a mitigation source or something that lends itself to more casino gaming. Think of characters like Troublemaker Crozet or Green Violet. Troublemaker Crozet is a fantastic mitigation source against cleave teams because he basically protects one DPS in particular. In this case, it's going to be Rem. The natural inclination of your opponents is to focus fire the Rem, but by doing so, you give Troublemaker Crozet a bunch of free combat readiness and allow him to dole out a bunch of free stuns, which can translate into some game wins here or there. Green Violet is very similar when it comes to this same style of play. He just is relying on counters in order to win the game, and he's very difficult to kill and super annoying, much in the same way that Rem is. Another strategy is you compare Rem with focus fire characters, something that takes the heat off of her. Characters like Hua Young, Landy, and Spectre fit this bill. Hua Young is a must-answer hero. If they are not going to take her immediately out of the fight, she is going to one-shot somebody, which diverts the attention from Rem, which allows you to get in a bunch of free iron strikes. And if for some reason Hua Young lives, her S3 will obviously kill somebody and thus trigger Demon Mode, which will allow you to get a ton of value out of your Rem. Landy and Spectre are hard carries that hide behind stealth and thus require some amount of AoE in order to get to them, which will in turn enable Rem to get a bunch of iron strikes off and deal a bunch of damage to the enemy team. Lastly, there's two more I want to talk about here. Seaside Bologna is a fantastic pick alongside Rem if your opponent has chosen no green units, specifically in the case of the Red Charlotte and or Bellion matchups. These are characters that must use AoE attacks, so therefore they are going to generate a ton of value for your Rem and your Seaside Bologna. So I think they go really, really well together. It's like picking two copies of the same exact character. And then the final one I have to talk about is Conqueror Lilius. Exceptional character. We talk about her a lot here in the teammate section. Insane opener, just honestly a pretty broken character. And the fact that she can use a guaranteed dual attack on her S1 means that if she pulls along Rem while she's in demon mode, it's basically lights out for whoever you're attacking. We talked about it in the previous section, but for good matchups for Rem, they're probably going to end up being cleave characters most of the time. So if you see any of the staple openers for cleave, it's probably a good time to pick Rem. Think of characters like Peyra, Ran, and even a character like Politis is a pretty good indication that your opponent is about to cleave. These characters are usually AoE openers, which means they open up the enemy team to getting iron striked and thus a ton of damage over the course of a game. So yeah, that is pretty much where you're going to be picking them. In the case of Politis, she's not really an opener, but she is a red character that has very few options to actually interact with Rem. And if she decides to try to cripple your team with her S3, you basically, again, open yourself up to more S2 counters. Other characters that she has good matchups against are, again, ones we talked about in the teammate section. Characters that are all AoE attacks, Rem is fantastic against. So think of characters like Bellion or Red Charlotte. They don't really have any options besides just giving you a ton of free damage on the enemy team. To round out the video, let's talk about Rem's bad matchup, starting with her worst one, which is arguably the most one-sided matchup in Epic 7, and that is Green Violet. Green Violet has a 100% chance to dodge everything that Rem does and return it with a very strong counterattack, and when he gets to 5 focus stacks, his S3 will outright kill your Rem in one hit. If Rem is the only damage dealer left on your team and your opponent has Green Violet, you should consider conceding unless for some reason this Violet is at like 10% or less health and you think you can get lucky. So yeah, that is definitely the worst one and the one I would avoid at all costs. Other bad matchups include Rimuru Tempest as well as Green Celine. Rimuru Tempest S3, Devour Black Flame, has a very high chance of killing your Rem in one hit based on your mitigation situation as well as how the Rimuru is actually built. He's just a nightmarish character for a lot of people in the cast to play against. And as far as Celine goes, her S2 Blink, when you activate a non-attack skill, if it is targeting Rem, has a very high chance of killing her in one hit because it ignores damage share. And if for some reason it doesn't kill, the extra combat readiness that she receives from the S2 as well as her artifact means it's probably her turn, and she can use her S3 Thunderclap to end the Rem's life there and then. Next up, let's talk about Landy and Spectre Tenebria. These are characters that sit in stealth and kind of hard carry the game for your opponent. Rem is primarily a single target damage dealer unless you trigger her counter very often. Landy and Spectre cannot trigger counter attacks on their skills, which means that you just are going to have a very miserable time and not get too much value at all out of your Rem. And in the case of a character like Landy and Spectre, if they have soul burns available, they can just outright combo and kill your Rem before she gets anything going. And then the last two to talk about are Lionheart Sirmia and Rowana. These are characters that are very, very punishing for counter-based heroes. So if you proc your S2 Iron Strike, in the case of Sirmia, she will use her S2, It's Far From Over, get a bunch of Fighting Spirit, and just unload and kill the entire rest of your team, which, depending on the situation, you might not lose that match, but it's very hard for you to win a 1v4 with Rem unless you just have insane RNG and proc a lot of counter procs. So I definitely don't think that's one you really want to be playing super often. And in the case of Rowana, you're just going to be giving their team a lot of combat readiness, a lot of free healing. It's not unwinnable against Rowana. It's not as bad as, like, say, Archdemon Shadow versus Rowana or, like, Solitary of the Snow versus Rowana, but it's still not a super great matchup for the most part, and it's still one I would consider avoiding if you can. And that is going to do it for how to play Rem. If I missed anything, as always, let me know down in the comments section below. And let me know which character you want to see me tackle after I talk about Amelia in the later part of this week. You should see her probably on either Thursday or Friday. If you want to see more guides in this same exact style, there should be a playlist on your screen now. And as always, enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Later now.